Next item.
Approval of minutes of the following Dearborn Board of Education meeting. Citizen Relations Committee meeting, June 13th, 2023. Board report 23-01. Executive session closed negotiations, June 19th, 2023. Board report 23-02. Regular P12 meeting, June 19th, 2023. Board report 23-03. Policy Committee meeting, June 28th, 2023. Board report 23-04. Recommended action, make any necessary corrections and move approval of these minutes.
So move.
Support.
Motion by trustee D'Ambrosio, support by trustee Petlicoff. Are there any corrections on any of the minutes being brought forward? Hearing none, may I attach unanimous roll? Please do so. Next item.
Next item, action items. Are there any agenda items on this agenda which board members or the superintendent wish to discuss and vote on separately? If there are, we will exclude these from the motion below.
Give everyone a second. We've got a lot of items. And if there are any that we feel would need a separate roll call vote or anything, let me know.
We got a closed session that we have to, I don't know.
Yes, closed session.
Yes, thank you.
19.
Number 19. So number 19 is going to need a separate roll call vote.
I think that's it.
Anything else that there's any discussion on? If not, I would ask trustee Watts if you can read the recommended action.
Move that action items numbered 1 through 18, 20 to 25 be approved as recommended in this agenda with the exception of 19.
So moved.
Support.
That was a motion by trustee Barry, support by trustee D'Ambrosio. Any discussion on any of those items? We didn't hear any before. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Going back to item number 19.
Recommended action, move that an executive session be held on Tuesday, August 8th, 2023 at 6 p.m. at the Administrative Service Center in room 12. The purpose of the closed session is to discuss the superintendent's evaluation per section 8A of the Michigan Open Meeting Act.
So moved. Support.
Motion by trustee McDonald, support by trustee Petlicoff. Any discussion on this? Roll call, please.
Trustee Barry?
Yes.
Trustee D'Ambrosio?
Yes.
Trustee McDonald?
Yes.
Trustee Moses?
Yes.
Trustee Petlicoff?
Yes.
Trustee Watts? Yes. President Thorpe?
Yes.
Summary of agenda action savas. Number 1, approval of an award to Curriculum Associates per Board Report 23-05. Number 2, approval of an award to Savas Learning Company per Board Report 23-06. Number 3, approval of change orders. Number 4, approval of an award to Severin Intermediate Holdings Power School Group. Number 5, approval of an award to Zoom Video Communications, Inc. Number 6, approval of an award to Secura Tech. Number 7, approval of an award to Secura Tech Guard Services per Board Report 23-07. Number 8, approval of an award to Secura Tech Inc. Services per Board Report 2308. Number 9, approval of an award to Cognia per Board Report 2309. Number 10, approval of an award to RKA Petroleum. Number 11, approval of an award to National Trails. Number 12, approval of an award to Ever Driven per Board Report 23-10. Number 13 to 15, approval of non-instructional and instructional personnel items for P12. Number 16, approval of an award to Excel Flooring Coverings, Inc. for Henry Ford College. Number 17, approval of financial statement per Board Report 23-15. Number 18, approval of policy updates, changes per Board Report 23-16. Number 19, approval of an executive session closed evaluation on Tuesday, April 8th, 2023. Number 20, approval of ratification of the Dearborn Federation of School Employees contract. Number 21, approval of ratifications of the Dearborn Schools Operating Engineers Association contract. Number 22, approval of appointment of Director of Assessment. Number 23, approval of appointment of Assistant Principal at Henry Ford Elementary School. Number 24, approval of appointment of special education coordinator. And number 25, approval of appointment of special ed coordinator.
Thank you. I want to do one quick jump back to citizen participation, letting you know that we're hearing everything that you're saying. You realize that we were in negotiations with every bargaining unit over the course of this summer. Every other bargaining unit now is just about settled with DFSC doing their vote a week from today, which allows administration and our people to focus all their attention on the teacher's contract to get this worked out so that when we come back for our August board meeting, we will be able to have that one completed. So thank you for everything that you do for our students in our district. Next item.
Discussion items, master plan, final recommendation, Dr. Glenn Maleko, Mr. David Mustonen, and Mr. Thomas Wall.
So we'll call up Mr. Wall and Mr. Mustonen. And just, this is really something the board had decided going back to the study session in the middle of May with Fielding, in that we were going to kind of reflect on the possible options that Fielding presented. And then we were to come back here at this meeting in July and get some direction to the board as to which plans we would potentially take to the community for community forums, which would be the next phase. It also may involve working with Fielding or a separate contractor to help do some of that work as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Mustonen and Mr. Wall just for a recap. And I do believe that we put the document from the 15th is in the board folder. That has tremendous amount of information and data.
Good evening, board members and Dr. Maleko. Thank you so much. Yes, so as you know, Fielding did quite a bit of extensive work in developing what they called 3 different proposed concepts. In 3 different conceptual ideas moving forward. These were not any kind of hard and stone, like this is what we're doing. This was more about visualizing the district for the next 30 years. After the 2019 bond, we went back and listened to the community, and one of the things that we heard loud and clear was that the district needed a 30-year plan for our facilities, a broader kind of vision for where the district was headed. That's what Fielding was able to put together, and they took those 3 plans and shared them with all of you. The next step in that process is to bring those 3 plans to the community to help the community get an understanding and develop that same broad 30-year scope of where the district is, where you as a board and as a community would like to see the district go over those next 30 years. Now, those 3 conceptual ideas that were shared, what may come back out of that is one of those ideas, or maybe it will be a kind of a mix of those ideas. These are the kinds of things that we need to find out and we need to go. We heard tonight from some folks who brought forth concerns about preserving historical buildings. That's a legitimate concern. So that may be part of what goes into helping this board develop their plan for what that next step would be. The hope would be that once there is that broader 30-year vision for where we want to go, then we can look at what that next step is to get to that 30-year plan. What is the shorter range goal to get to that broader 30-year plan? But first we have to have that idea in mind of where we want to go with this district. I know that I had kind of made a impassioned statement at one of our study sessions, and I will just kind of reiterate the fact that it is a very exciting time for this district. It is a time that decisions need to be made that will impact this district for years and years to come. probably not since the merger of the Dearborn Public Schools and the Fortson School District in July of 1944, has such monumental decisions been made about the direction of how this district is going to look and how it's going to function. So these are huge, huge decisions. They're not just infrastructure decisions, although that's a huge part of it. They are instructional decisions, and they are how our buildings will be part of our bigger, broader, greater community decisions.
Thank you. I'm gonna,
Dave summarized it well. So, and I'm here just to support wherever the board wants to go. The things as an administrator, I want to make sure we have a short-term plan and a long-term plan. And so we're really looking for feedback from the board of what they heard and what are their feelings and how do you want us to direct administration move forward to kind of bring forward what the board's, goal and expectations are.
Trustee Pelichkov.
Okay, so I'm going to start the conversation off then. And I've already shared some of my thoughts with some individuals, and I've been speaking around the community as well. A couple of issues here about moving forward, and I understand the question that was posed, and what we heard from the community the last time we went around. But we've got a couple of issues here that I have with the study. One, I asked at the time of the study, would they take into consideration how we could preserve a lot of our older historic buildings, at least the facades, and be able to rehab and renovate. Unfortunately, every choice they gave us from A to Z included demolition rather than rehabilitation of buildings. And it was up to 13 buildings in every A to Z plan, whether we keep the neighborhoods concept to going to these consolidated school systems. They included demolition of approximately half of our school buildings. I know some of our buildings are in real need, but I wanted to see if there was a way we could at least preserve some of the historic aspects. And not only that, my concern even more about the environmental impact of destroying that many buildings in one community and the fallout from that, of the discard of all the properties in that manner, no matter how we kept it, and the disruption to each of the neighborhoods. Even if we kept the neighborhood concept, they still talked about demoing schools and building new in a lot of neighborhoods. And that was going to be a real impact on the neighborhoods because that's not a 6-month project. So I had a concern that we didn't get a different type of plan that could incorporate that renovation and preservation rather than just demolition and building new. That I took issue with that in the study. We've got the history of, what is Dearborn but Greenfield Village and Henry Ford and all this history here. I don't want to see us discard it in happenstance because bright, new, and shiny looks like a quick fix. I think there are other alternatives we should at least attempt to consider, and I didn't see that being presented to us. The other thing I have a concern about with the 30-year plan, I was just, the other day, I have a new neighbor, a young mother. She's 21, 22 years old. She was raised here, but then moved to Lebanon for a while, then came back. And she was asking me how long I'd lived in my home, and I said almost 40 years in the same house. And she said, oh my God, when we lived here, we lived in 7 or 8 different homes. We moved all around the city. Now, I know for a fact, when I was first on the board, this was a very common thing of people moving from one neighborhood to another and not necessarily residing in the same neighborhood school area for an extended period of time. Now we're talking about looking out 30 years. We don't even know how long the majority of the voters are going to be here and willing to support a plan we put into place today that could potentially last monetarily for decades, that they may, the next generation moving in may say, that's not what I want to support anymore. I have a real concern about being able to project out for that length of time and know what the next generation of parents are going to want for their students. And are we making a decision that is not necessarily going to have the longevity that we think it will have? So we need to be very careful in how we approach the conversation with the community and their expectations of what it's going to look like and how long it's going to take to get there. And that was always another one of my concerns. So those are some of the things I have to consider in the conversations we have.
Other trustees' feelings before we start to take things to the community? Trustee Moses.
Thank you. I believe the initial purpose of the study is to evaluate all of our buildings and how well they're doing to the 21st century standards. And I do recognize we are an older district that has older buildings. And those buildings come with a high cost of maintenance. And we need to make bold decisions, and this is what the study was for. And I am for definitely listening to what the majority of the community wants to do. There are three proposed ways where we can go through. I don't think that much data was collected as far as feedback on where everyone wants to do. But I do concur that with the new architecture designs, there is some way of preserving the historic side of Dearborn into newer buildings. I think that was done with Fortson's addition. We saw that we did add a lot of space and preserving the same architecture design that we had, although it costed more, but it was done and there was feasibility of doing it. So I'm all for listening and holding town halls in the community to hear their feedback. I also have a question about the selection of the next step. I know Fielding recommended a certain, or they recommended one firm already for us. So do we still have to go through bidding the process though for this contract that was around $189K?
Yep, the submission of the master plan to the board meeting at last time was their conclusion of their original engagement. We would be able to, if the board wanted, to amend that engagement to continue for the next part of actually going out to the community and get feedback on the district's plan to move forward and how they thought about the master plan that they were submitted and any direction the board wants to give us to look into. So we would not be required to, because we have the board action, we would amend the current contract to continue that additional scope.
Trustee Pelichko?
And as that was just, I talked to Mr. Wall about that, and that was an example of what we could do if we wanted to move forward with hiring an outside firm to do the town hall or communication PR part. We don't need to use the Fielding recommendation. We could hire any other PR firm, maybe somebody more local, instead of somebody from outside of this regional community. Who maybe knows our what we've incurred in the past in issues and or questions that have come up at any of these proposals in the past. So all that was an example of one way we could go. We don't necessarily have to choose that particular vendor in order to move forward with what we would have to decide on basically is, do we want to use somebody? Do we want to pay somebody to go out and have these town halls or communicate in any way? We could change the scope of what their job is. It could be more survey-based as opposed to town hall. I don't know. That's for us to decide now.
Trustee McDonald.
As Mr. Mustonen was speaking earlier, he was saying there's a destination that we're going to need to get to. And the way I see things is there's a lot of things that are converging all at the same time. Our need for infrastructure is huge, and we know that, and that's throughout the district. Some of the things that we've discussed while we've been talking about this is that, okay, we have older buildings, and yes, absolutely, Dearborn is a community of history. And I think that's important, and I've heard that from a lot of people that I've talked with, and I believe that too, that we've got some amazing buildings that do need to be preserved. So we have infrastructure needs. We have, when we were looking at it, we talked about when we put money into buildings, we just wanted to have an idea of, are we throwing in money for buildings that just, they're close to the end of their lifespan anyway, or are we going to continue to do this? Or is it more feasible, and is it a better option to really invest in these buildings? Because a lot of buildings that were made 100 years ago were made stronger, and they were made to last, and they were made with better materials. So as I see things, I just see all these things coming together, including what do our students need to learn? And how are they going to learn in the future? Because things are changing. The jobs that they're going to have in 10 years, 15 years, 20, 30 years are going to be different. The way they're going to collaborate with each other in the workplace is going to be different. So we have all these things coming together, and we need to look where we see, with the help of the community and teachers and students and everybody in this that has a stake in this community and in preparing our students, we have to be able to kind of gauge where we believe we should be to help our infrastructure needs, to help our students, to help our community, to make this the community and the place to come, to have our students learn. There's all these things that are coming together, and AI is another one. So we are, like Mr. Mustonen said earlier, we are in a place right now where big decisions do need to be made. So I just wanted to make that point. There's a lot of things that we think about, but we have to decide on some direction. And it doesn't have to be set in stone. It's a vision. It's big picture. But we have to get the people that are involved in this community and that have stakes in where we're going to give some more input, and we come up with a plan. And it has to keep all of those things that I mentioned in mind. What do our students need? What does our community need? What are our infrastructure needs? Because again, like I said, those are things that are coming together right now, and we have to move from this place to whatever we vision will be what our students and our community needs in the future.
Trustee D'Ambrosio.
Well, I'm going to piggyback off of Roxanne. The only thing I would like to say is I would like to see a shorter study, like a 10-year study, instead of stretching it out over 30 years. The shorter study would give us a better indication where we're going, and then we can build onto that 10-year study. So that's all I have to say.
Trustee Barry.
Yes, when it comes to a PR firm, me personally, I would support a local firm just because of the contacts and, understanding the community in different parts. I'm not going to repeat anything that my colleagues just said, but I just want to, remind everybody why we even went out for this study. The community, the majority of the community back in 2019 spoke very loudly and said, look, we don't want to put any more Band-Aids on our buildings. If we're going to go out and support the schools, we want to see some brick and mortar. Doesn't mean that's a decision that's been made already, but that's what the community was saying. So I'm looking forward to the next step when we go back to the community. I think some of my colleagues have heard from the same people that I've heard from, maybe a dozen people, that, of course, we want to preserve our beautiful buildings, but at what cost? Sometimes, I'll give you the perfect example, William Ford. on the corner of Chase and Ford Road. Whoever decided on making that decision had the courage to make that decision was a genius. Brand new building, air conditioned. It was still on the same campus. We can get very, very creative in keeping the buildings, neighborhood buildings. I know our former colleague, Mary, said that she would stand in front of Fortson High School. I think all 7 of us would stand with her and with that decision ever made. I don't think we've made any decisions, but we're following the orders that the community are telling us. 2019, we went for a bond, and it was shot down, and we heard, it was very loud and clear, that, look, it doesn't have to be all new buildings, but some of these buildings over 100 years old, why keep putting money into them? Another perfect example that comes up is Henry Ford Elementary. We're over, 900 students, 850 students there, an elementary school, because we didn't have the vision back then to say, okay, why are we gonna build a branch out this way, another 8 classrooms this way? I mean, if you look at the building from an aerial view, you're probably thinking, what the heck were they thinking? But that's a perfect example. It does not mean that we're gonna tear down all of our buildings and build brand new ones. A, we couldn't afford them, and B, I don't think anybody would support that. But regarding a PR firm, I would like to see somebody more local.
Trustee Watts?
From what I'm hearing all of my colleagues say, I think we are looking forward to the next step.
Yes.
And I think part of that is also, I would like to see a PR firm from the Southeast Michigan area who has done this successfully in other school districts. So we can look to see what other school districts in the last year, what bonds they have been able to pass, and see if we can go ahead and get a bid placed on that, on those, or have a bid placed and see if any of them apply. That's what I would like to see.
Additional comments before I make a few? He will reiterate a lot of what you've already heard, along the lines of what Trustee Petlicoff said about new, I'll just say new versus old buildings. One of the things we hear is flexibility, and some of those old buildings don't have the flexibility as a newer build. Wanting to do a 30-year plan, even though it's impossible for us to think 30 years out, or it's improbable, you don't want to keep putting Band-Aids on the buildings that we know are going to need some work. Looking at something shorter term is fine, but the overarching thing is whether we're saying renovate or we're saying replace, we need to know that the community would be there for us and be willing to support it. And if they're willing to support new but not renovate, if they're willing to renovate but not build all new, we need to know that in the conversation. So does this give administration an idea of what the board would want moving forward?
I think the first step would be then to put out an RFP for local, Southeast Michigan companies or entities to help us design, taking the data we've already done so far, looking at the parameters of what the Fielding International put together, because it has a lot of data in there about the condition of the buildings, which ones would support different curriculum models going forward, things like that, to kind of help us go back out to the community, take the data from the Fielding International and help develop a consensus on some of the notes I've heard versus, old versus new, the approach of what we want to have for our neighborhood schools or something different. I think that's kind of the general idea of what I've heard.
One thing that I would add is I feel that this needs to be at a school level at these presentations, because this is going to touch every single building. This isn't going to be like the ones where we say, well, we'll just do 3 or 4 locations and it'll be at the high school. The people that have got their kids at Oakman need to know what's going to be happening there versus at a Duval or McCullough or any of these other schools. So I think we would need to do a lot more meetings when we're talking to a firm. Anything else that the trustees would like to add?
I'm just,
So,
Trustee McDonald?
part of I'm looking 30 years ahead, and if we're talking about each individual building, and I understand that each individual building needs specific things, but those are two different focuses. So are we looking at the short term for each individual building, or are we looking at and want to concentrate on what the big vision for a 30-year is.
I would expect that you're doing both of them. You're talking about what's in it for this building now versus later. How does this building fit the master plan?
Okay.
That would be the way that I'd be thinking about it. And in some cases, we'd probably be having to have these conversations of, this building's not gonna be around forever. And we're starting to prepare people now for the fact that some of these buildings might need to be torn down and replaced with something that better fits the community's needs.
Well, I saw that too, but so running those things simultaneously is what you're saying, okay?
I would think if
That's,
Instead of looking at the big picture and then pulling back, just running in both.
Trustee Petlicoff?
I understand what you're saying, but we have to have then some kind of way to, and this would be who we work with as a PR firm, how we message it, because I think it can get complicated for parents. Parents are going to be in the here and now.
Right,
How is this going to affect my students for the next
Absolutely.
maybe 5 years that they're going to be in this local neighborhood building kind of thing? And they're not going to care after that a lot of times. They might say, hey, look, I'm moving on to the next. Now, so we have to have a comprehensive conversation so that they can say, okay, I'm not committing to just my student here right now, but where my student is going to go to in the next move, and then the next move, and then where my grandchildren might be going. And so then we have to also help, and that this is where it gets sticky, then we're not only talking about the actual physical structure of where their children's going to be at, because they're looking at safety, comfort, health, flexibility, but the fielding study also incorporated a philosophical concept of how to teach. And what you were looking at in the future of. And that's what the 30-year outlook was projecting, was our kids aren't going to be learning in the same kind of way that they're learning currently. And that's the harder thing for people to understand, what it is that they will be doling money out for the next 30 years in these building concepts. So this is going to be a real tough conversation we're going to have, because people are only going to probably take away those things that are meaningful to them at the moment.
But you also, if I can jump back, you also think, okay, say I have elementary students right now at a particular building. And we're talking, okay, by the time that these studies are done and we've got a direction that we're going to go, that's already a
They're
little
gonna
down
be-
the road, a little down the road. Okay, so I need to think of where my kids are going to be in middle school, like you said. But we don't know. We've got 30 buildings which are we going to tackle first? So again,
I'm
these
saying
are.
this is going to be a real tough juggling act.
That's why I would like the community not to just think of their little portion at this particular time. And I understand that's a hard thing to think about. But we are a community, and every student in this community deserves the best that we can give them. And every student in this community deserves for us to be thinking about them as our own children.
But
And
the
I'm not just
students-
talking about the board, I'm
students
talking
of
about the
today
community.
are not going to be the ones who are probably going to benefit from whatever
I understand
improvements are
that.
made. And that's where people are going to start to have a hard time knowing what they're buying into, so to speak.
They're buying into a community that hopefully they will decide to, in whatever corner of it, if they move around or whatever, they plan on living here for a long time, or their children are gonna be invested enough or feel belonging and feel anchored enough to stay, which is traditionally what Dearborn has been.
Trustee Barry?
yes, Mr. Mustin mentioned earlier that it was probably, 70 years ago, some big decisions were made. Some people saw a vision. 80 years? Okay, thank you. So they saw a vision for this district, for this city, for this community, for this part of southeastern Michigan, and it's paid off for us. It served us well. So the easy thing for this board to do is just, listen to a lot of people and just come back and say, okay, we'll just keep continuing putting Band-Aids on building. But that's not what we heard from our community or part of the community. I get that part. For us to sit there and think, what are these buildings gonna look like 30 years from now? Well, I know most of us won't be around here 30 years from now, but we got to bring everything in, How does this affect home values? The vision, the schools, why are the surrounding districts moving in that direction and we're kind of stale here in that department? So yeah, of course, the current parents are going to say, hey, I just want to get through the next 5, 6 years and move on. But then it's going to have to come back to us. Do we have the courage? I truly believe Fielding did an amazing job. They did exactly what we wanted to do. They heard us, and they gave us a nursery report. Doesn't mean we have to, take the recommendation step by step. But after we hear from the community, I'm looking forward to some tough decisions at this table. What's in the best interest of Dearborn, future Dearborn?
Mr. Wall.
So I love the conversation, but we need to put a timeline to it to make sure that we get through this process and everybody's on the same page to when to make decisions. Because, philosophy is good, but we got to put an actual time to it.
Absolutely.
The other concern I have is, back in 2019, we recognized $500 million of needs back in 2019. We were able to do a lot of work in the last couple of years, and we have a lot of work going on now with the ESSER funds and the energy improvement that we're doing, but there's still going to be a lot of building issues as we go forward, and it's only going to get worse. So that's why I don't want to lose that short term too, that, we have to figure out, as a directive from the board, how you want us to handle that short-term needs. And that could either be reorganizing the existing budget and putting more money towards that outside, looking at potentially a sinking fund or a smaller bond issue, because safety and security is a big issue. Now, we've gotten a couple of million from the state to start addressing that. That's where you see the elementary cameras were on that today, but there's a lot of needs out there. You've heard today about air conditioning, and do we want to put the money in the old buildings? So there's that short-term need to be able to go forward and be able to do some of the stuff while we're working on that longer-term process. So having a timetable is a good way for us to make sure what is the board's expectation of how long the study should take. Because when we go out to the RFP, they're going to know when they have to make the decision, how much staff they have to put towards it, and that everybody's on the same page of expectations.
Trustee Watts?
So with that, could we combine what you were just saying, because I was thinking the same thing, we still are going to have needs at the building level. Can we combine the short-term needs of the building with the 30-year study if we were to go out for a bond as well? So that it would also satisfy this is what the timeline says for like phase number 1, 2, and 3 in terms of all of our buildings being in the Fielding study, but it'll also touch or address the issues of saying perhaps at this child's school that, Oakman needs this or Lindbergh needs this.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? So we could do both.
And a lot of that data is there already and exists.
Yes, okay.
But I would probably want to also maybe, have, a subcommittee with the board working on this also. So we're keeping that communication and the steps along the way. It could be the finance committee, it could build a building and site committee, but something that the board's, has representation of the decisions and the timeframes and knowing the progress that we're making.
Trustee Petlicoff?
In this conversation that we're going to have, one of the things that's going to be asked over and over again is, how much is this going to cost me?
Correct.
We had the big picture number of $1 billion, but that was over the 30-year long haul plan. Are we going to try to whittle that down to what the people who we're going to be talking to realistically are going to be in? I mean, we're not going to ask them to pay up front for the 30-year projection, which may or may not actually end up materializing at the time. So what kind of dollar figures are we going to be putting out there for them when we have this conversation about what we're looking at? Because we're going to have the philosophical conversation, but we're also going to have the realistic,
Practical.
Right.
Figures.
What I've been told by the experts is you can do roughly about $40 to $60 million a year. That's just the capability of schools, being in session, 9 of the 12 months and all that. So you can't really expect to do all that kind of work in 1 year. It's got to be spread out over many years. Now, what gets done first or later will depend on priorities. You could have a vision of having 1 or 2 new schools, every 3 years, 4 years, and do renovations on the others, and then continue rotation. But then again, how do you make that decision of who goes first? Now, we had Fielding International that has done a study to say which buildings are the highest priority. But again, it's still, what does it make instructionally make sense? How do you balance new versus, renovation costs? All those conversations have to be made, and eventually someone has to make the decision on their priorities.
And when we go out for a bond, the bond is going to be what, 20 years, basically?
Well, the
generally,
bond can be anywhere
if we
from,
go out.
1 year to 30 years, all depends
Right,
what the
that's-
size is and what's
What the scope.
acceptable level that the
All right.
public's comfortable moving forward with. Because right now, our millage rate was at 4.82 back in 2019. Now it's only 1.3, 1.35, I can't remember. But it's a lot less. So people have realized those savings, so anything we do going forward is going to be an increase in taxes for our public. So that's where, the public community input is going to be very important of what they're willing to tolerable to do to get to where the vision is. And the vision is what we have to tell everybody in the public what our vision is so they can get behind it.
But they'll get behind a vision when they know how much it's going to cost them as
Right.
well.
So it has to be part of that conversation, correct?
Yeah.
Trustee Watts.
So what I'm hearing next is that you are asking us whether or not this should be part of the Building and Site Committee, or is this going to be part of Finance? Is that
Correct.
correct? So that's
I-
what you're waiting for us to give you guidance?
Yeah, we have a lot of data that we can give and put into an RFP to ask people to help us get to the next step. I believe the first step in that whole process should be they should have another work session with the board to make sure they understand the direct input the board wants us to do. But we can go through get an RFP out there, select people, and get a variety and make a choice. But I'm saying going forward, we need to have a committee of some sort to make sure they're along with us and keeping that communication with the board.
I would think it would concurrent. Building and site would be the one that would be dealing more with the needs of those buildings and maybe prioritization, whereas the finance could be the group that's working on how are we paying for it. That would split the work up between trustees a little bit more. Off the top of my head, I don't know how much overlap there is between those two groups. But that would be one thing. In the meantime, we can move forward with the RFP for the group that's going to assist us on this one. But I'm kind of picturing this is going to be a few phases
Yeah.
to move
And
forward with it.
But it sounds like we're all in agreement. We think we should outsource the messaging.
The PR.
It's really more, and I know it's a generic term, but just because words are part of my job, I think it's more about community engagement and communication. It's not really
PR.
PR. It really is about community engagement, engaging all of the community, not just certain members or certain groups, but all of the community. We're a community of 100,000 people. So, we need to engage our neighborhoods, our business districts, our elderly, parents, people who don't have kids in school, parents with kids in school, parents who are about to have kids in school. I mean, we can go on and on and on. But that's really what it's about, is engaging all of those groups. I'm a big fan of those home improvement shows, where they buy a house and then flip them. And I love it because this is kind of where we're at with that same thing. People will buy a house that needs a lot of work, right? It needs all kind of work. And they get a vision. And the architects come in and they do this cool computer animation and they show the people, this is what your kitchen is going to look like. And this is what your bathroom is going to look like. And they give them a vision for what that whole completed thing is going to look like. And they show them all the parts and they give them a final price tag. But it starts at one spot, and it starts with an exact dollar amount at one spot, at one part of the house, and then they work through and they get through each one till they reach that total vision of what that final house is going to look like. That's where we're at on a much grander scale. We're talking, millions upon millions of dollars. We're talking 30 schools. We're talking a lot longer time frame. But that's where we have to be. We have to get people on board and part of that visioning for that big process. And then we can say, okay, we're going to get there by first doing this. It's going to cost this amount of money, and it's going to affect this school and these people, and this is how we're going to do it. And once we go there, then we're going to go next and the next. And people have to see that greater vision and how all those little pieces interact with that greater vision. Because you're absolutely right. When you first go out there, that's the first thing they're going to say is, how's this impacting me right now, my dollar and my kids? That's just human nature. People just want to know right now, the here and now, my kids. So we can't disrespect that or ignore that. We have to incorporate that into that greater vision of how we're going to accomplish this.
Just one thing I want to tag on in what you're saying is, as you said, we need to incorporate the whole community because this huge project all over the city and the changes in the city themselves will have an impact on everybody in the city
Right.
in one way or another.
Sure.
And one of the other groups that we need to consider always is the employees.
Absolutely.
Anything additional? Are we?
I was
Dr.
just going to
Malenko.
say, from what I heard, and I kind of suggesting aligned with what you said about the committees, I think I'm hearing from the board, we'll go for the RFP. We'll probably, as soon as we get that done, we'll probably in the fall have these forums when we get back, with the group that we select. At the same token, the Building and Site Committee would work in tandem, meaning those short-term needs where you want to invest, they will know, because some of the work, even if you do build new, is going to be years down the road. So which buildings and what areas that we should invest now, like we put air conditioning in certain places. So I think the Building and Site can do kind of what you said and work in tandem and just knowing that there's also this long-term plan, which, Mr. Wall, I know you've done that already, and Mr. Andrews on a lot of the projects through Esther. You've kept that in mind when certain recommendations have come forward for different renovations. So I agree with the board, and that's kind of what I'm hearing. I think that this is going to be a long process, but an important process.
Thank you very much.